Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm Lilia Gonzalez Chavez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Fresno Arts Council. So I hope you all know the Fresno Arts Council. If you don't know the Arts Council, what you probably know is Art Hop. Who in this room knows Art Hop? Yeah, there's some people that don't know Art Hop. Interesting. I thought everybody in the arts community knew Art Hop. Well, Art Hop is a fun event on the first Thursday of every month downtown and in the Tower District. So come back downtown on the first Thursday and learn about Art Hop. But before I get too far into this, I want you all to think about what we've been through. The Fresno Arts Council and many of the people in this room today worked really hard to pass the Measure P initiative. And that was an uphill climb. We passed it with 52% of the vote. And because it was a tax initiative, it wasn't recognized right away. And so we went through a court process, and the court said, yes, citizens of the city of Fresno, you did pass a tax initiative, and you get to have this wonderful thing that we call Measure P to support parks and the arts. The parks part is 88% of the fund. And some of you will hear big numbers about how much money there is in Measure P. Well, the parks part is 88% of the fund, which that's the big part of this whole initiative. But 12% was dedicated to the arts. And it's that 12% that we're here to talk about today. But I want you all to give yourselves a big round of applause because congratulations, we now have a Fund for the Arts in Fresno. Now, we haven't had any dedicated funds for the arts since probably around 2011. That's quite a long time ago. And it wasn't very much. It was about $500,000. So not a lot of money. But now this fund is going to average about $5 million per year dedicated to the arts. Now that sounds like a big amount of money. But when I now become more aware of the universe of organizations that might qualify for this funding, it really isn't that much money. And so our role today is for you to think like applicants. Think like people who might apply for this fund, because we're going to be talking about the guidelines. The guidelines will tell us how these funds will be dispersed. So that's our purpose here today. And this is being recorded so that people who couldn't get here will be able to participate and contact the Arts Council later and give us their ideas, because we want to hear from as many people as possible. We won't be able to obviously adopt everybody's suggestions, but the more suggestions we have, the better we are at responding to what the community interest is. So by signing in today, you gave us permission to record you. If you don't want to be recorded, you're welcome to leave, and no hard feelings, because this is going to be recorded, and I needed to let you know that so that you don't say later when you see yourself on YouTube, I didn't know they were going to do that, because you will be on YouTube later. So So wanted to just get that out of the way. But the other thing, and the handout that I shared with you explains all of this, but we are working on a tight timeline. We are trying to get this all together so that we can have the first RFP out in November. So that's quite ambitious because there's a lot to get done in a short amount of time. And some people might say, well, why don't you wait and, take more time? We kind of feel like we've taken a lot of time already, probably more time than most of you can stand to wait, because organizations, many of them are hanging on by their fingernails, just trying to keep afloat and keep going. And so these funds will make a difference to your organization. So we really want to get this out as soon as possible. The projected timeline is we had our initial PRAC committee meeting, and the PRAC is a subcommittee. Actually, let me go back. The PRAC is the Parks and Arts Commission, and that was established by Measure P. So the commission has oversight over these funds, along with the city of Fresno. But the PRAC can appoint committees. And so they have an ad hoc committee, which is for the Arts Fund. And so it's the PRAC ad hoc committee and the Arts Council that are working together on developing these guidelines. Once we develop these guidelines, and you can see that we've had a stakeholder meeting on August 31st, and then one today, September 6th. Then we'll go back to the PRAC committee on September 11th. They'll review some of the information, most all of the information that we gather at these meetings. We will put together a final set draft of guidelines that will then go to the commission on September 25th. So you will have an opportunity on September 25th to see what that final draft of the guidelines look like. And you can comment at that point again. So there will be another opportunity for community input. Once we get this thing together, it's drafted, it goes to the commission. When it goes to the commission, it will be a public document, and you will be able to comment again at that point. The commission will have suggestions, and we'll massage it again, and then we'll have a final draft that will go to the Fresno City Council for adoption. And they might tweak it and adjust it also. So it's going through several steps before we have a final document. But I think that's a good thing. This is a public process. And so the public should be informed and be able to see it as it goes through its phases. When it goes to the city council, that also will be a public document, and you'll be able to comment to the council if there are things in that final draft that you really find objectionable. Hopefully you won't, but that is another opportunity should you choose to take that opportunity. So once it goes to the city council for adoption in October, then we'll be able to develop the RFP, put an RFP out to the community. We're hoping that happens in the first week of November, or at least the first part of November. So the RFP will be out for at least 60 days. We actually have it scheduled for a little more than that. But just in case something goes wrong, we provided ourselves with a little cushion. So we will close the application process January 15th. Now, for some people, that's really great, because if you do other things besides just your art, then there's some time in between during the holidays when there's some downtime to work on the proposal. But if you're like a lot of us, you probably won't work on it until the last 10 days before it's due, and that's after the holidays. So you'll still have a nice chunk of time to work on it before it's due. Then it will go to review by adjudication panels. And once it's adjudicated, then that information will all be gathered. It will go back to the PRAC for review. And then we will be able to award grants probably in about April, late March or April. So that takes us a long way. So that's why we're really eager to get this done and ready for you by November. So funds really won't be released until about April of 2024. But I did mention that today I want you to think like an applicant. Now, at our last meeting, this room was full. And I noticed that a few of you are back again. I don't want to bore you. I'm going to repeat the same thing. This is not anything new. So if you thought it was going to be something different this time, it's not. But you're welcome to stay if you just want to sit through this one more time. But I do appreciate all of you who were able to make it out today. And something that I'd like you to do before we go any further is turn around and look at somebody near you and introduce yourself and tell them your name and what you do. Do you want to take a few minutes to do that? Okay, if you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. If you can hear my voice, clap 3 times. Great. Thank you. The reason I asked you to do that is because as we move forward with this process, particularly as we get into the application phase, you may want to partner with other people. And the more people you know in the community, if you're not used to partnering or collaborating with others, here's a good chance to meet some people that care about the arts, that are working in the arts, that you might end up working with in the future. So I appreciate you getting to know each other in this way. Now, when we think as applicants, there are some things that we think about. And one is that grant guidelines should provide an explanation of why funds are available. So the grant guidelines will provide an overview of Measure P, an overview of the work of the Arts Council, an overview of the city process and the Cultural Arts Plan. Another thing, applications should be easy to access and respond to. So we want to make sure that our guidelines are not complicated, that they're not too wordy so that you have to read through 5 pages before you get to the real questions. We want to make sure that they're easy for you to respond to and that you can access them easily. We use an online platform for applications so that we've already used many times, and it's user-friendly and easy to work with. You want to be able to determine your eligibility right away, because why go through the process of reading this 15-page document if you're not eligible to apply? So you want to know your eligibility. You want to determine the amount of funds that can be applied for. If you want to do a $50,000 project and this fund only allows for $5,000, then maybe this isn't going to do it for you. Or maybe you're going to have to piece multiple grants together to come up with your final project. Questions should be concise and not redundant. I can't tell you how many times I've applied for an application, applied for something, and they ask me in 5 different ways, how do I do community outreach? And you want to say, I just told you, but you don't. You try to come up with some other explanation because that's what they're asking. We hope not to do that to you in this process. Questions will lead to evaluation of applicants and their ability to successfully use the funds based on how well you tell your story. So the questions in the guidelines that I hope you come up with some good questions today. The questions in the guideline should help you explain your work, why you deserve to be funded. We just did fellowship grants for the California Arts Council, and we reviewed all of those applications. And the most successful applicants were poets and writers. Well, duh, they know how to tell their story. So we want to make sure that the questions we ask you in this process allow you to tell your story. And so how we collect that information, I also want to know about. Do you think we should allow you to submit videoed responses? Do you think that you should be including videos of your productions, what you've been doing? Something else that helps to tell your story besides just the written word. Because we're so good at using technology today to share information. So let's walk through a skeleton of guidelines. Now, I will tell you that what we handed out is just a skeleton for guidelines. It's not the whole guidelines. It has some things in it that are specific to the ordinance. The ordinance says that arts organizations will be funded with these funds. So that's specific to the ordinance. And so that information is there. Actually, it says that nonprofit arts and cultural organizations will be funded with this fund. And what we've included for you so that you know what the ordinance says in your handout, these are the key elements of Measure P, of the Measure P ordinance. And these are the things that you'll see in it. We said there'd be background and purpose, a background about the Measure P ordinance, the PRAC, the Arts Council, the cultural plan. Arts organizations defined. A cultural arts organization is defined as an entity with the primary purpose of providing arts, creative, or cultural programming services. This purpose is determined by the organization's mission, purpose statement, and or by its summary of core organizational programs and services. So we will want you to tell us what your core organizational services are, your mission statement, and your purpose. That will be part of the guidelines. Ineligible, who's not eligible? This is a list of groups that currently are not eligible to apply for funds. But you might identify, and if we get enough recommendations for some other group that should not be eligible, we want you to tell us. And there's some Post-its around the room. And later on, when we've gone through this process, you'll have an opportunity to write your suggestions and recommendations on smaller Post-its. And Suliana back there, Suliana Caldwell, a member of the Arts Council staff, will give you the Post-its, and you'll be able to write your comments and put them up around the room. That's how we're going to gather the information. We want to generate information. Yes, Rose?
I noticed that individuals are ineligible. When we granted grants before, individual artists were involved. And why were they taken out?
It's because the ordinance specifically says arts organizations. Okay? So eligible organizations, 501c3 organizations, or projects with a fiscal sponsor. What's a fiscal sponsor? A fiscal sponsor is a 501c3 organization that can represent a collective or a group that would like to apply for funds, but they're not a 501c3. So they're going to find a eligible 501c3 in the community that can apply on their behalf. Or you will probably be required to fill out the application, but you'll do it in the name of this other eligible organization. So fiscal sponsorship is something that we think at this point should be allowed, but there's nothing set in stone. If everyone here says, oh no, you shouldn't have fiscal sponsors, tell us. Let us know if you think that's not appropriate. It's a common practice in the grant-making world to allow groups to apply with a fiscal sponsor. But that's what you're here for today, to tell us if you think that's a good idea or not. Types of applicant organizations eligible to apply using a fiscal sponsor include, and so I just mentioned that, but one thing about fiscal sponsors, it's being suggested that they at least have 2 years of arts programming or service. And you're probably wondering, well, what does that matter? Well, this is going to be a responsible organization who should have practices in place, should have accounting systems in place, should have a system that they can adequately manage your funds. If they can't, you don't want them to manage your funds anyway, because who knows what could happen. So eligibility requirements. The City of Fresno based documentation of being a Fresno-based nonprofit cultural arts organization or nonprofit social service organization with regular or ongoing arts programming and or services and a principal place of business in the City of Fresno. Why is that important? It's important because this is a City of Fresno tax initiative. It was the City of Fresno taxpayers that agreed to tax themselves this tax. So it was intended for residents of the City of Fresno. So you have to be a 501c3 within the City of Fresno. Arts programming applicants must have a minimum of 2 years. That's arbitrary. If you think they should have 3, if you think they should have 5, you let us know what you think. A certificate of good standing. Nonprofit organizations and fiscal sponsors must have active status with the California Secretary of State and be in good standing. And the organizations must also be in good standing with the Office of the Attorney General. This is important because If you're not keeping good track of your money, if you're not responsible, and you're not doing your regular reporting, that says something about your ability to manage this fund. But more importantly, in the case of the Attorney General, you're not eligible to receive public funds. So this is not arbitrary, it's a requirement. Yes?
Okay, I don't belong in any organization, so how is that going to get me to qualify? I'm a culture dance, I'm a loud culture dancer teacher. I teach students, I don't charge for the dances. I just want to carry on the tradition and art. I danced since I was 5, and now I'm in my late 40s, and
Okay.
I don't want it to die off.
Okay.
But I don't have an organization.
Okay. Organizations like you can apply with a fiscal agent. That's the reason why fiscal agents are made available. You can identify another organization in the community and apply under that organization. Okay, we'll have time later to answer more questions. I'm going to go through this. Okay, letters of agreement. If you're going to have a fiscal sponsor, you need to have a letter of agreement from that fiscal sponsor. Again, it sounds like one more tedious thing that we're asking of you, but if this young lady here decides that she's going to apply for a grant and she says she's going to apply with Arte Americas, and Arte Americas doesn't even know who she is, then that's a problem. So you need to have a letter of agreement from the fiscal sponsor if you're going to use a fiscal sponsor. There are 2 types of grants that we're going to be developing guidelines for. One is general operating support, and the other is project specific. General operating support is support for all those things that that cost our organization, but don't directly go into the delivery of a project. And it's like you have to pay rent. You have to pay for your accountant if you have an outside accountant. You have to pay for staff. You have to pay for your utilities. Those are the kinds of things that are overhead costs, that are operating costs for an organization. You can apply for general operating support to cover those costs. Project-specific grants are for projects that you want to develop that respond to the cultural arts plan. In the cultural arts plan, there are some very specific activities that the community says they would like to see. We have copies of the plan right there. They're not the final copy, but we do have some copies that you can take a look at and you can take with you. Because if you know what's in that plan, then you know what kind of activities you can apply for. It's really a lot of those things that many of you in the arts community are doing, but you just want to be sure that you're addressing the cultural plan when you start responding. And so the guidelines will speak specifically to that and require it, since project-specific grants may go out multiple times in the year and specify outcomes consistent with the goals of the cultural arts plan. So unlike operational support, which will probably put one operational support call out right away, and that'll be the first round, we might stagger a couple months later and put out the project-specific grants. Project-specific grants right now, the operational support is what people are really needing for those organizations that don't have operational support, and it's the hardest money to come by. And that's why it was addressed in the initiative. Operational support it's hard to get a funder to give you operational support. They want to have you do something new and innovative, do something different. But you have to pay for the PG&E, and you have to pay the rent, and you have to pay for staffing. So operational support is very different from project support and something that is specific to the ordinance. Yes?
I just wondered if there was an exact range for the operating support.
We'll be talking about that next. When you look at the next box, it says request amounts, and it's general operating support. The formula that is here is just an example of what might be. At the last meeting, I heard all kinds of different suggestions of what this might look like. We will identify the one that seems the most practical given the amount of funds that we have and the number of potential applicants. Because if we make the grants too big, let's just say we were going to say everybody gets $500,000 for general operating support. Well, that sounds pretty cool, but we only have $5 million. So how many grants could we give? Not too many. Everybody in this room would not get a grant. So we need to be thoughtful about what's the best way to distribute this fund so that everyone in the community has access and everyone can be served. Now, it's true. Some people will apply and they won't get funded. That's just the way of the world. But we want to make it as accessible as possible. So we've put a funding formula here that's not set in stone. It's just one possibility. You tell us, and there's right back there, there's a Post-it that says funding formulas. Come up with another formula that you think might be more equitable, that might make more sense. But remember, we've got a lot of people to divide this pie with, and the pie can only go so far. So we need to make sure that we spread the wealth.
Can an organization apply for operating and project?
Can an organization apply for operating and project? At the present time, yes, but we got a lot of recommendations at the last meeting that shouldn't occur. So it really is, it's going to be dependent on the information we gather, but right now, what this says is yes. So there's a range of project grants from $2,000 to $200,000. That might be too much. Some people might say that's not enough. It depends. But again, we need to think about what is enough to do a decent project, pay artists a proper wage for their work that they're investing in this project, pay staff that's working on the project, and pay for supplies and materials. So you tell me what an appropriate range is. Yes?
What I didn't see on the project-specific grants is a timeline, like, is it going to be for 12 months? Is it going to be a 2-year? I didn't see anything along those lines.
That hasn't been developed, but you tell me what you think it should be. And there's a Post-it right there that says others. So the question was, what is the timeline for projects? And moving on, funding restrictions. Organizations with budgets over $3 million must choose between general operating support or project-specific grants. So it's suggested that maybe you're not able to apply for both if you have a large budget, because you'll see that the percentage that you might receive in general operating might be considerable. Matching funds, that's a question. Do you think matching funds should be required? Some funders require matching funds. We could not apply for National Endowment for the Art Funds because we couldn't make a match. Now, because we are going to have the Measure P funds in re-granting, this was re-granting funds that only arts agencies like the Fresno Arts Council could apply for. We're able to apply for those funds because we finally have a match. But for years, we couldn't. So do you think we should have a match or not have a match? That's a question for you. Let me get through this, and then I'll open it up for some questions. Okay, so that's application review. Online process. I mentioned that the Arts Council uses Submittable. Submittable is a application platform. It's really user-friendly. We've used it a lot. We think that, anyone applying for these funds will have an easy time with it. So that has already been established. Panel adjudication and ranking. There will be an adjudication panel. Typically in the arts, there are peer panel reviews. So we have people that know the discipline that is being rated, that know the arts community to sit on these panels so that they can adjudicate the grants. So it's usually made up of local artists, arts administrators, and members of the community. If you think there should be other participants, let me know on other. And then give us 3 or more criteria that should be included to determine successful execution of a project. So we'd like you to tell us what you think the evaluation process might look like. That's not to say we don't have ideas. The Arts Council has been doing this work for a long time, but this is a new process. We can give it a new twist if we hear ideas that the community has that make more sense. Ultimately, the PRAC committee will forward information to the PRAC Commission and then the City Council for final approval, which I already mentioned. But we still have a ways to go, so we want to hear your ideas. We have a sample question here that we think makes sense. Describe your cultural arts programming, include artists involved, number of arts programs you offer per year, educational components included in your programs. You give us some other ideas for questions that you think we might ask. All of this information will help us develop a really positive guideline. Now, the final decision for the grants will be the PRAC Commission. So I mentioned that applications will be submitted. Then there will be an adjudication process, hopefully by a peer panel. Some kind of panel from the community will be made up, given your recommendations. And then those rankings and those recommendations for projects will go to the PRAC for acceptance. So that will be the final word on that. We will have to establish some kind of, and the word is escaping me right now, but opportunity for you to object if you think that your grant was not judged properly. So an appeal process, that will also be included. And that will be some very standard language about the process was not followed accurately or there were some other mitigating factors that caused this application not to get the review or ranking that it deserved. So that appeal process will be included as well. Okay, now I'm going to open this up for questions and give who you have a question, but then you're going to have to pass this on to the next person.
In the matching funds, I know with other grants, sometimes they'll agree to in-kind support to be in place of actual dollars. Is that something that's going to be considered?
If you write it on the, you can put it right here in other, as that's your recommendation. Okay, who else has a question? Rose.
I've seen sometimes where matching funds is a separate category all by itself. So you can apply for a grant, but you got to match the funds. Mm-hmm. And some of them are just straight out grants.
Right.
So that's something to consider.
Sure.
If you apply for a grant as an organization, does that exclude you from being a fiscal sponsor for a group like the dancers?
No. In fact, we hope. One thing that the Fresno Arts Council has done for years is we have served as a fiscal sponsor for organizations. But because we agreed to manage the fund, we can no longer serve as a fiscal sponsor for anyone who's applying for these funds. So we are looking for organizations in the community who are willing to serve as fiscal sponsors so that when we do have the RFP process out, we can say, these are possible fiscal sponsors that you can check in with. But we would want to be sure that all of your tax information is in place and that you have a history of providing arts programming in the community.
Okay. Would the fiscal sponsors also have to be subject to the same eligibility requirements as the grant seekers?
Yes.
Lily, you were just describing like a vetting process. Perhaps you haven't gotten to that point yet, but will there be someone at the Fresno Arts Council or on the PRAC committee that will be like vetting these applicants or ensuring that they're following through on what they said they're going to do?
Yes.
Who's going to have that responsibility?
The Arts Council.
That's what I thought.
The Arts Council will have that responsibility.
And second question, then, it's mentioned a legal contract. Since this is taxpayer money, I assume there's some kind of letter of agreement or contract if an entity receives funds and then they have to perform A, B, C and have deadlines, et cetera. Okay.
Yes. And that won't be in the guidelines. That will be in the agreement letter.
I wanted to kind of set a context with organizing that we did for Broadway Park to try and get arts embedded in the park. And it was a very challenging process with the Parks Department. So I want to kind of let everybody know here that our artists, that we also need to be organizing in the parks space to make sure that they're not creating barriers for art. So in a specific example, Broadway Park at Broadway and Elizabeth and Tower is going to have a rough-faced concrete wall that we had wanted to do murals on, but it becomes a barrier to doing a mural. So we want to be thinking about that and not kind of silo ourselves into we only get the parks or the arts pie, but really expand that we need to be thinking about all the pies and even not letting the police take part of our parks pie. So that comment to follow up on that would be in the criteria, if we could be putting in that any of the arts programming that is embedded in a parks location should, kind of be elevated because we're looking at that kind of synergy of parks and arts together.
You have.
Did you saw the question? So we'll do here and
Okay. I'm a relatively new nonprofit 501c3 status here in the city of Fresno. So I don't have the 2-year history of providing arts, cultural programming. It's going to be a component of our social services community service. So we wouldn't have the certificate of good standing. So how do we encourage new nonprofits to apply for this program that is geared to a vulnerable population or a marginalized community that Fresno City hasn't addressed yet?
Yeah.
Or are these just recommendations when it comes to eligible requirements?
Yeah, and that really is going to depend on where we land in terms of requiring. Do we require the 2 years? Do we not require the 2 years? Is there an entry fund that's allocated separately that is an entry grant opportunity for organizations that aren't eligible, that don't qualify under the 2 years, just so that they can get started? Because that question came up at the last meeting as well. We're gathering all this information, trying to decide how to best serve the community and still be responsible. Because yes, it's true, there's a lot of startups, but there's a lot of people, and many of you are here, that have been working in the trenches in the arts, doing the work with no outside support. And this is an opportunity that you've been waiting for. And now to just say that it's free for everyone to jump right in, I don't know. Those are issues that we have to consider and weigh the pros and cons. But I hear you, and it is something that we need to think about. Okay.
To carry on the same subject, I believe they can apply through fiscal agent for the first couple of years until they prove themselves that they're fiscally responsible prior to applying themselves. That's a very practical way of doing it.
Okay. And I'm going to ask that you not respond to each other.
Yeah, okay.
But okay, so.
Okay. My question is on the funding restrictions when you have grant operations and specific project grants. Will the funding source be divided into the two, or will there be one funding that the agency can apply? Will there be allocating, let's say, 40% for operating funds that the organizations can apply, and for the 60% for the specific project?
Once we've identified a process and we know exactly how much money we're going to give out, the PRAC and the Arts Council will sit down together and identify an allocations formula.
Okay.
And that allocations formula will determine how much will be set aside for organizational support and how much will be set aside for project support.
Thank you.
Okay.
Don't laugh if I ask this question because I'm kind of new. How do you become an organization, or how do you build an organization? Because so far I'm just teaching, and everything's free. Most of the time I'm just digging into my pocket, paying for everything but it just makes me happy because I'm doing something what I love and just passing on. So somebody recommended me to come to this meeting.
Okay.
That's my question.
The question is a good one, and a question for a lot of fledgling artists in the community that do what they love because they can't help themselves. For many years, I volunteered. I gave my time to create Arte Americas, the Latino Cultural Arts Center, and there it stands. And I'm kind of proud that that was a good investment of my time. But that doesn't really answer your question. Your question is, how do I become a 501c3? And come see us at the Arts Council. We'll refer you to someone who can help you do that. And that's a technical assistance question that we answer all the time at the Arts Council. Okay.
Okay. Who's next?
All right.
Kind of slash question comment about the 2-year criteria as well. When you're asking for substantiation of like 2 years of programming, I don't think we got our C3 within the 2 years, but we've been, we were starting up, volunteering and stuff. Is a pandemic being considered in that timeline? Because a lot of us couldn't start 2 years ago. So, I mean, we're just coming out of that. So, and it was still impactful. So that might be something to consider because, the practical, and then like we've got folks who are doing the work and clearly deserving of those types of funds. And that there's inhibitors. So of course, we're going to voice our opinions on those, but the pandemic is something to consider in these timelines because.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. No, we actually, in the first meeting of the PRAC subcommittee, that came up was the pandemic. Something that needed to be considered for that 2-year requirement because maybe people weren't able to program. We're thinking about those things, but it's good that you bring it to our attention now and certainly write us a note about it in eligibility requirements. Okay? Yes.
Yes. I've dealt with fiscal agents in the past before becoming a 501c3. And are there limits on the amount of administrative costs a fiscal agent can request from an organization? Because sometimes it's pretty high.
Yeah, and that's something that will end up going in the application itself, and it will be part of the budget template, and it will identify a percentage allowable. Generally, the allowable percentage is 10%. No, I've seen it pretty high too, but kind of the general rate is 10% because it takes away from your program if it's too much. Yeah. Okay. All right. One more.
So I'm like an individual artist, and I also have an organization. Been applying through fiscal sponsorships, and we've gotten some grants. And for Measure P, it sounds like there's a lot of involvement with trying to get, new members, new community members here in Fresno City, artists that might not even have known about funding that's been available. And I just kind of reflect on my process of, having to really get competitive with grants. And it seems almost like the Measure P is so focused on organizations. I wonder how that's really going to affect individual artists who might not even know about grants, about their ability to kind of get fiscal sponsors as well with the application process. I know that the KDA creative grant that came out, it was really easy to apply because there was already money allocated for projects. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to, me being an individual artist, I'm not looking for operating expenses. She was saying that she dances and stuff. A lot of times we're just looking for project funds. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if there's a way for you guys to allocate funds specifically for projects that allow it easier for individual artists to just apply.
Yeah. And I hear that, and I know that there are other funding opportunities that provide for that. The ordinance was very specific. It identifies organizations. And so we have to fund organizations. That's what the ordinance says. But you can apply with a fiscal receiver. You've been doing that successfully. You can also apply to provide a service in alignment with another applicant. One of the things that is going to be important in order to respond to that need, because there are two things that we have to respond to as we develop this process. One is the original ordinance. We have to follow the guidelines of the ordinance. The other is the cultural plan. What did the public say they wanted to see? And in the cultural plan, it talks about individual artists and how do we support individual artists. So the application itself might have questions, and one of you could develop one, perhaps, and write it down for us. But it might have a question that says, tell us how you engage with individual artists if you're an arts organization. And then that creates an opportunity for organizations to partner and align with individual artists. So that's one way, one possible way that we could respond to that. But the ordinance is very specific. Organizations must apply.
Okay. I think, because I mean, I know for me, I'm going to find, I'll find somebody for a fiscal sponsor. But I'm thinking more as like me being a beginning artist and where I would look. And I know, for an example, with the KDA, them being like a hub, or even if there's just one fiscal sponsorship or organization that can, you know, kind of step and say, we're the ones that are going to serve individual artists. I can see, you know, me being back then, before I knew about all this and how the grant process worked, I would be more apt to feel that it's accessible to me, knowing that there is an organization ready to kind of represent the project that I already have, versus having a list of organizations that I might not know of, or having to jump around and not knowing, or if you're not involved in this community, you know.
We're actually going to try to have a list of potential fiscal sponsors so that people can work with fiscal sponsors. But there was, Hugo had his hand up, and now I see another hand. Can we get back to Hugo?
Yeah, thank you. Hugo Morales on Radio Bilingüe. You know, I was here the last session, and I did listen as in this session that you were asking for comments and suggested criteria and so forth. So I have written a couple pages of comments.
Great.
So I'm not gonna. What I want to do is I assume that material submitted here can be part of the record to go to be considered going forward in terms of comments like everybody else.
Sure.
Am I correct? Okay, so I'm going to submit those. But just in summary, what I say in terms of what I have drafted for a possible application is that it should be responsive, as you're saying, to the arts plan, which includes diversity. And there should be a way to measure where we are now in terms of the arts organizations as opposed to a year from now or 10 years from now. So there should be some kind of mechanism to gauge what progress is being made, whether it be to address the diversity or benefit our diverse populations, but also the commitment we have to the youth as well. So anyway, those are my comments. So I'm not going to read them. I'm just going to submit them. And then also the application itself. And if anybody, well, first of all, I'm going to submit it to you as part of the process. And then if anybody else would like a copy of my remarks or application, suggestions, including criteria, I'll give you my card and you can email me. And I also have like a few printed copies if anybody would wish them. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's one more.
Just to go back to the individual artist thing, would it be within the purview of these guidelines that we could connect somebody like me at the Shinzen Garden looking for artists to become part of our grant request? I mean, is that something that could happen within?
Yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting process moving forward. The Arts Council has a very specific role. We are not the ultimate decision maker. We are responsible for providing technical assistance and support to the arts organizations and individual artists so they can successfully access this resource. It is a partnership between the Arts Council and the BRAC to identify the guidelines and the rules for how this process works. But it then becomes incumbent upon the Arts Council to assist the community in applying for the funds. So there's a couple things we're looking for. And selfishly or not, today's meeting and the meeting that we had last week was an opportunity for us to get a handle on the universe. We know that there are many more artists and arts organizations than have been surfacing in the past. And part of it is because there were no resources, and people are out there doing their thing on their own, and they don't check in with the Arts Council because they don't think they need us, and maybe they don't. But now that there are going to be funds available, we're going to be seeing more people and getting to know more of the arts ecosystem that perhaps was hidden before. So yes, we will be providing support and assistance. Okay? If that's all, then I really do want you to take some time. You've been given some Post-its. They're the lined ones that you can stick together and make a long old trail if you have that many things to tell us, and put the Post-its up. And like if you have ideas for the funding formula, the types of projects that should be funded, questions that will help you tell your story, any other information, eligibility requirements, who are eligible organizations, who are ineligible organizations, and then funding restrictions, if that's right there in the back of the room. Fill these poster boards with your thoughts and ideas. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're thinking. So thank you very much for coming tonight.